On the early morning of December 31st, 1775 AD, the British Army defeated the Continental Army of the United Colonies at the Battle of Quebec. The city of Quebec was under the defense of General Guy Carleton, who was also the governor of the province of Quebec. He had over 1,800 defenders stationed around the strong fortifications of the city. The Continental Army of the United Colonies were led by Generals Richard Montgomery and Benedict Arnold, who had over 1,200 volunteer soldiers. Quebec City was held under siege by the Continental Army for the past several weeks, despite being outnumbered and outgunned. The besiegers were unable to properly siege the city because the ground was so frozen that they were unable to properly dig trenches or establish artillery batteries to batter the walls of Quebec. On December 30th, General Montgomery made the decision to storm the walls of Quebec City the very next day because of the expiring enlistment of the soldiers, along with the snowstorm that was blowing in would provide cover for his troops. Under the cover of darkness and snowfall, Montgomery led his troops to storm the gates of St. John around 5 a.m. on December 31st. They entered the outer section of the city before they were spotted by sentries. Confused by the streaks, Montgomery led his soldiers toward a blockhouse that was occupied by Quebec militiamen. Despite the heavy snowfall and gunfire, Montgomery tried to rally his men, but was gunned down by grape shot that was fired from one of the defenders' cannons. Captain Aaron Burr, who was one of Montgomery's aides-de-camp, was one of the few survivors to retreat back to the camp without being wounded. He unsuccessfully tried to retrieve the general's body. General Benedict Arnold's assault on the walls of Quebec City fared about just as well when he ordered his soldiers to march toward the walls of Saint-Martelot, but they were unable to return fire due to the defenders' positioning. Arnold tried to march his soldiers around the Porte du Palais, but their defenses were too strong, along with the heavy gunfire that rained upon his troops. The Continental Army managed to enter the city, but the confusing streets, along with the snowfall and constant defensive fire from the defenders, made it difficult to gain any ground. The fighting became brutal as the desperate colonists fought hand-to-hand and house-to-house against the British soldiers and Quebec militia until they ran out of ammunition and hope. General Arnold was wounded during the final assault and had to be dragged back to the Continental Army camp. Captain Daniel Morgan assumed control and rallied the soldiers and was nearly successful until his troops were split in half by the British Army and the Quebec militia. They were pinned down from all sides, forcing Morgan to surrender. But he gave his sword to a French-Canadian Roman Catholic priest rather than to surrender it to General Carleton. The battle was over around 10 a.m., and Captain Morgan, along with 372 other colonial soldiers, spent the next year and a half as prisoners of war. Daniel Morgan would later become a colonel for his bravery at the Battle of Quebec, and later a general. General Benedict Arnold, suffering from a leg wound, would continue to lay siege on the city of Quebec, despite now being outnumbered 3-1. Guy Carleton had no plans to pursue the Continental Army because of what happened at the last Battle of Quebec. General Montgomery's body was buried by the British soldiers on January 4th after it was identified. Carleton ordered him to be buried with dignity, but not with a lot of fanfare.